One of the most expensive lies people tell themselves about money is not, I am bad with numbers. It is too late. I have heard that sentence in 100 forms. I am too old to start investing. I missed the great years. I should have started in my 20s. Other people got there already. Now I have to do something dramatic to catch up. I understand the feeling. If you wake up one day and realize you are 42 or 49 or 56, and you do not yet have the investment account you imagined, it is easy to turn that realization into a private shame. You begin comparing yourself to people who seem younger, freer, further ahead. You look at headlines about million-dollar portfolios and early retirement, and you feel as if the train has already left the station. But I have spent too much time around money to respect that kind of thinking, because the truth is not that starting late makes wealth impossible. The truth is that starting late punishes confusion more severely. That is different. A person who starts late can still build real wealth. A person who starts late and stays vague is in trouble. A person who starts late and then panics into risky nonsense is in even more trouble. A person who starts late and finally becomes disciplined can still do very well. That is where I would begin. Not with guilt, not with nostalgia, not with fantasy about what you should have done 15 years ago. I would begin with this. If you are late, you do not need drama, you need design. Most people, when they think they are behind, reach for intensity. They want to invest more aggressively, earn more immediately, cut more brutally, find the one stock, one crypto position, one side hustle, one secret that will compress time and erase regret. That instinct is understandable. It is also dangerous because when you feel behind, you are emotionally primed to make bad deals with your future. You become vulnerable to anything that promises speed. You start confusing urgency with wisdom. You stop asking whether a decision is sound and start asking whether it feels like it closes the gap fast enough. That is not how wealth is built. That is how late starters often hurt themselves twice. First by delaying, then by overreacting to the delay. I would rather do something more rational. I would start by facing the numbers so clearly that the mind has nowhere left to hide. This is the step almost nobody wants to take, which is precisely why it matters. People say they do not invest because they do not have enough money. Maybe sometimes that is true, but often what they really mean is they have never looked long enough to know how much they actually have available. The mind is very skilled at producing stories in the absence of evidence. I don't make enough. Everything is expensive there. Nothing left at the end of the month. I am too far behind to matter. I'll deal with it when things calm down. I have no interest in stories when the statements are sitting right there if I were rebuilding late. The first thing I would do is strip away the story and replace it with numbers. What do I own? What do I owe? What is my net worth today? What comes in after tax? What leaves every month? What part of that is essential? What part of that is emotional? What part of that is inertia dressed up as necessity? That is not judgment. That is clarity. And clarity is far more merciful than avoidance. People think looking at the truth will make them feel worse. Sometimes it does for an afternoon. But once the numbers are visible, something important happens. The fear stops being fog. The problem becomes mechanical. Hard, maybe embarrassing, maybe, but mechanical. Mechanical problems can be improved. Fog only makes you older. So I would take the last 3 months of spending and categorize it. Essentials, discretionary spending, hidden leaks. Essentials are obvious enough. Housing, utilities, groceries, transportation, insurance, minimum debt payments, core obligations. The things that keep life standing up. Discretionary spending is not evil. I am not a monk and I have no desire to turn anybody into one. But dining out, shopping, entertainment, trips, random purchases, convenience habits, the spending that feels small in isolation and enormous in aggregate, that all belongs in plain sight. And then come the hidden leaks, which I have always found particularly expensive because they survive on inattention, forgotten subscriptions, auto renewals, impulse orders placed because it was late and you were tired. Tiny monthly drips that nobody would defend proudly if they had to say them out loud in one sentence. These things matter because wealth is not only destroyed by dramatic mistakes, it is often delayed by silent leakage. I would want all of that visible. Then I would ask a question that cuts straight to the bone. If I keep living exactly this way for the next year, where does it leave me? Not emotionally, numerically. That question tends to sober people very quickly because for many late starters, the real issue is not that wealth is mathematically impossible. The real issue is that their current pattern has no surplus assigned to the future. The future's getting leftovers. If anything, and leftovers rarely compound into freedom. This is why the next step is not just to stare at the numbers, it is to create a spending plan that reflects intention instead of drift. I dislike the word budget because most people hear punishment. They imagine a list of forbidden pleasures, a life reduced to guilt and spreadsheets, an endless little war over coffee and turnips. And whether happiness is permitted after 6 p.m., that is not what interests me. What interests me is a conscious spending plan, a structure in which you decide in advance what proportion of your money deserves to go to fixed costs, what proportion must go to investing, what proportion must build savings, and what proportion is allowed to fund guilt-free enjoyment. That is a civilized approach. It lets you enjoy money without pretending enjoyment, and chaos are the same thing. I have always believed that if you love something, spend on it generously, but if you do not love it, stop funding it out of habit. That one principle has probably saved more money than most financial tricks people argue about online. So if I were starting late, I would carve out the categories clearly. Fixed costs kept within reason. Investments treated as non-negotiable savings, funded intentionally. Guilt-free spending allowed, but contained. The late starter, as great error, is to assume investing can happen only after some mythical future month when life is finally calm and tidy and all spending urges have become mature and enlightened. That month never arrives. Money must be assigned before life has a chance to improvise it away. That is why I respect automatic systems so much. A person who says, "I will invest what is left," is not really describing a strategy. He is describing hope. Hope is pleasant. Automation is profitable. If money moves automatically to the right place when the paycheck lands, then the future is funded before fatigue, temptation, or self. Justification can hold a committee meeting about it. I trust that structure. Now let me say something that people starting late especially need to hear. You do not need to overhaul your whole life in one act of financial theater. You need to free up meaningful room. Sometimes that comes from 1 or 2 large changes, not 20 tiny acts of performative deprivation. Renegotiate the phone bill. Requote the insurance. Change the internet plan. Lower the APR if you can. Cut the subscriptions nobody values. Reduce the spending categories that are not actually part of your rich life. Take the money that was drifting into unconscious consumption and redirect it deliberately. That is grown-up work. And once that money is redirected, I would not send it first toward some speculative bet masquerading as catch-up strategy. I would send it toward the most powerful structures available, which brings me to retirement accounts. I have always found it remarkable how many people refuse free money and then complain they are behind. If your employer offers a 401k match and you are not capturing it, then you are doing more than missing an opportunity. You are rejecting one of the best immediate returns available to an ordinary worker. A dollar contributed and matched is not abstract theory. It is an instant acceleration of your long-term plan. The arithmetic is almost embarrassingly favorable. Fe Filicite Fe Turn 19 File 0 Fe. Use it. I do not care if you feel late. I do not care if you feel embarrassed by your current balance. I do not care if you think other people are ahead. The match does not care either. It works just the same. Then there are IRAs, Roth or traditional, depending on the specifics of the person, situation, taxes, age, and future expectations. Again, the principle is not complicated. Use the tax advantage space available to you. Late starters need every efficient structure they can get. There is no virtue in ignoring tax shelter while dreaming about performance. Performance with unnecessary friction is still weaker than it needed to be. Fe Filicite Fe Turn 19 File 0 Fe. And if you are over 50, The world quietly gives you something younger investors do not get: catch-up contributions. That matters. It means the system itself recognizes that later starters or older savers may need more room to accelerate. I would use that room with real seriousness. People hear those contribution limits as abstract bureaucracy. I hear opportunity, fay file site, fay turn, 19 file 0 fay. This is where a lot of late starters go wrong emotionally. Instead of appreciating the tax shelter and the extra contribution room, they become obsessed with trying to make up for lost time through risk. That phrase, catch up, is dangerous when it enters the wrong room. If catch up means raising your contributions intelligently over time, using matches, using IRAs, increasing by 1 or 2% each year, sending bonuses and refunds into investments, fine. If catch up means chasing individual stocks, trying to time the market, buying what is hot because your shame demands speed, then the phrase has already become poison. I would rather grow slower in a sound vehicle than faster in a delusion. That is why I prefer simple investing for people who start late, broad, diversified, low cost. Boring enough that your ego has nothing to do, automatic enough that your moods do not keep voting. People often ask what to invest in as though there must be some hidden answer that proves sophistication for ordinary people, especially those who are late and therefore cannot afford behavioral self-destruction. The best answer is often the least theatrical one. A target date fund can be perfectly sensible. Broad index funds can be perfectly sensible. The point is not to build a hobby. The point is to build wealth. I have always liked anything that reduces the temptation to tinker. Tinkering is one of the great destroyers of late start confidence. The market moves, the person gets nervous. He starts checking, then he starts reacting, then he starts translating every short-term move into a personal referendum on whether he started too late. That is madness. Money does not need your anxiety, it needs your consistency. This is especially true because people starting late often underestimate how powerful consistency still is. They look at a portfolio and think only in terms of dramatic returns. They imagine they need some miraculous annual performance to get anywhere meaningful. But what they really need is not a miracle. They need contributions, compounding tax shelter, time used intelligently from this day forward instead of wasted grieving the years already gone. That is enough to do a great deal, not everything, but a great deal. And I would go further if you are starting late. Your late start should make you more disciplined, not more reckless. That is the correct emotional response. It should make you say, I cannot afford years of hesitation anymore. It should make you say, I cannot afford dumb risks disguised as urgency. It should make you say, I will use every efficient structure available, and I will stop asking perfection to arrive before action begins. That is how adults recover lost ground. Now, I can hear one objection already. What if there really is not enough room to invest meaningfully? Fair question. Then the answer is not to lie to yourself. The answer is to address earning. There is a hard ceiling on how much you can cut before the quality of life becomes absurd or the whole plan becomes so miserable it collapses. There is no fixed ceiling on how much you can earn over time. That does not mean income always rises quickly. It does mean that any serious late start plan must eventually ask the question, how do I increase my earning power? This is not about slogans. It is about leverage. A raise can fund the match. A side income can fund the IRA. A skill can widen the gap between income and lifestyle. A better role can compress years of slow drift into one meaningful upward turn. People like to joke about stretching onions and watering toothpaste and trying to frugal themselves into freedom. I understand the instinct. I grew up around enough ordinary people to know that thrift matters, but I also know this. There is a difference between being disciplined and getting trapped in tiny savings while ignoring the larger possibility of bringing more value into the world and getting paid more for it. Late starters need both discipline and leverage. Negotiate the raise, build the skill, monetize what you know, take on freelance work, consult, teach. Use the tools available in your era instead of pretending your current paycheck is the final border of your life. I have seen people transform their financial trajectory, not because they found one magic stock, But because they combined a conscious spending plan with a better income path and then routed the new money into investments before the old lifestyle machinery could swallow it, that is how you accelerate without gambling. And let me tell you another thing the late starter needs to hear. You are not late because your account balance is low. You are late only if you keep waiting. That is the real dividing line. A person with very little invested but a sound system started today is in a far better position than a person with more knowledge, more opinions, and no action. Action matters, not performative action, not opening 7 financial apps and calling it transformation, not posting your age online and announcing a new era. Real action. Know the numbers, free up the gap, capture the match, use the IRA, increase by 1%, automate the investments, invest the bonus, stop chasing, stop waiting, repeat. That is not sexy enough for the internet. It is good enough for real life. I also think late starters need mercy, but not indulgence. Mercy means you stop beating yourself up for what is already gone. Indulgence means you use the regret to justify more delay. I want no part of the second thing. You are not helped by turning the past into a courtroom. You are helped by turning the present into a plan. And if you ask me what kind of plan I trust, I will tell you this. I trust plans built on clarity more than inspiration. I trust automated structure more than mood. I trust tax efficiency more than financial performance theater. I trust broad diversification more than stories. I trust contribution discipline more than prediction. I trust increasing income more than obsessive penny, pinching once the big leaks are addressed. I trust time used wisely more than time mourned. That is the roadmap, and if you follow it, something remarkable happens. At first, the account still looks small, then the contributions start to feel normal, then the match starts doing its work, then the IRA balance stops looking symbolic and starts looking real, then the annual increases compound. Then the urge to catch up through risk loses its glamour. Then the system becomes more powerful than the emotions that once kept you stuck. That is how ordinary people build wealth, even after a late start. Not with one spectacular move, with a series of intelligent, repeatable decisions that stop the drift and start the machine. I have always had more respect for machines than for speeches. A machine does not need motivation. A good machine does not care whether you felt inspired on Tuesday. It takes in money and sends it where it belongs. Your job is to build that machine. And if I were starting late, that is exactly what I would do. I would face the numbers. I would create a conscious spending plan. I would cut what does not matter. I would automate what does. I would take the employer match. I would fund the IRA. I would increase contributions over time. I would resist the poison of trying to catch up through risk. I would work on earning more, and I would stop asking whether I missed the boat because the boat is irrelevant. The real question is whether you are finally rowing in the right direction. Do that long enough, and you may discover something very interesting. It was never too late to build wealth. It was only too expensive to keep delaying it. That is the truth I would want a late starter to hold. Not false comfort, not shame, just truth. And truth, when used properly, compounds too. There is one more point I would make. Because people starting late often carry a private fear they do not say out loud. What if I do everything right now and still never get where I thought I should be? My answer is this. You may not end exactly where you once imagined. Very few people do. That is not the right standard. The right standard is whether your money is becoming more organized, more intentional, and more useful each year. Whether the future has more structure than it had before, whether your life is becoming harder to corner, whether your savings, investing, and earning are finally pointing in the same direction instead of canceling one another out. That matters. A late start handled well can still produce a remarkable second half, not because time is infinite, because order is powerful. I have always loved compounding because it rewards humility. It does not care about your excuses. It does not care about your embarrassment. It does not care about what somebody else achieved by 30. It only cares what you give it. Now, and whether you leave it alone long enough to become more than it first appears. That is a deeply hopeful fact. It means your next 10 years do not need permission from your last 10. That is freedom. And freedom, in the end, is what all of this was supposed to buy in the first place. And because this matters so much, I would end with one more warning. Do not confuse information with transformation. A late starter can become addicted to financial content the same way another person becomes addicted to shopping. It feels responsible, it feels productive, it feels like movement. One more podcast, one more breakdown, one more spreadsheet template, one more opinion about Roth versus traditional, one more debate about whether now is a good time to invest. At some point, all of that becomes a way of staying emotionally busy without becoming financially different. I have seen that pattern too many times to be polite about it. Knowledge is useful. Action is compounding. They are not the same thing. The late starter does not need another month of self-education as an excuse. He needs the first transfer, the first cut, the first matched contribution, the first funded IRA, the first automated increase, the first quarter in which the future was paid before the present began improvising. That is what changes identity. And identity matters because people do not sustain a good system only by logic. They sustain it by becoming the kind of person who sees the system as normal. The late starter stops being someone trying to get around to money and becomes someone who funds his future as a matter of course. That shift is subtle. It is also enormous. At first, the action feels forced, then it feels reasonable, then it feels obvious, then it becomes part of who you are. That is how recovery becomes compounding instead of temporary enthusiasm. So no, I would never tell a late starter that everything is easy or that lost years do not matter. Lost years matter. Delay has a cost. I am too honest to pretend otherwise. But I would also never tell him that. Because time was wasted, the only respectable response is despair. The respectable response is structure, then contribution, then patience. That is not glamorous enough for people who sell dreams. It is more than good enough for people who want real results.